talk will be delivered by Kara Dansky, who is a lawyer, writer, and founder of the Substack newsletter, The Turf Report, and the Democratic Women's Declaration. She has published 2 books, The Reckoning, How the Democrats and the Left Betrayed Women and Girls, which we're selling autographed copies of for $25 right over there, and The Abolition of Sex, How the Transgender Agenda Harms Women and Girls. She served as president and member of the board of directors of WDI USA from 2021 to 2024, and as a member of the board of directors of the Women's Liberation Front from 2016 to 2020. She also serves on the editorial board of the academic journal Dignity, a journal of analysis of exploitation and violence. Before turfing herself out of a career, she worked to reform the U.S. criminal justice system, including as senior counsel on criminal justice policy at ACLU from 2012 to 2014. She has a JD from the University of Pennsylvania Carey Law School and a BA from Johns Hopkins University. So if you'll all join me in welcoming Kara.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for being here. It is so good to be here with so many women I've never even met. That just shows how much this is growing. Yes. Okay, so I'm here, as Elizabeth said, to talk about where we are today in the movement to protect the sex-based rights of women and girls and to stop the abolition of sex. I first gave a version of this talk in Canada for the group Canadian Women's Sex-Based Rights in March. Incidentally, the Canadians gave me this lovely scarf. And then a different version of WDI globally in July. So now I'll be focusing even more closely on the US and bring us up to speed as to where we are today. So for anyone in the room who is new to this movement, I just want to say at the outset, you'll be hearing a lot over the next few days about the movement to protect the sex-based rights of women and girls. And if I had to sum this up in a single phrase, this is about protecting women and girls as a sex class from all forms of discrimination against and exploitation of women and girls. And by women and girls, I mean both all women and girls and only women and girls. Women's sex-based rights is grounded in a radical feminist analysis, a political movement that fights for our autonomy and for our liberation. We oppose pornography and prostitution. Radical feminists support reproductive integrity, which includes the right to terminate a pregnancy, and women's right to be free from the slavery of surrogacy. And we don't tend to mince words. These days, radical feminists care, actually, I'm really hot now. These days, radical feminists still care about a lot of things, but our movement has essentially been hijacked by what's called trans, or gender identity. People who support those things think that some people are members of the opposite sex, members of no sex, or members of a non-existent third sex. So, in order to fight for women and girls as a sex class on all fronts, which we do, we have to claw our way back to getting law and society to acknowledge that we even exist as such. That's what we're doing here this weekend. So, with all that said, there's a tool called the Movement Action Plan, which is a fascinating political analysis of social movements, which I'm going to refer to here using the acronym MAP. So when I say MAP, I mean Movement Action Plan, not any of the other things. This was drafted by a guy called Bill Moyer in 1987. So although it's younger than many of us in this room, it's pretty old. But that doesn't lessen its utility. The map describes 8 stages through which social movements normally progress over a period of years and decades. For each stage, the map describes the role of the public, power holders, and the movement itself. It provides organizers with a map of the long road of successful movements, which helps them guide their movement along the way. And I found this because I get asked, where are we in this movement right now? And I have just found this to be a very useful tool for answering that question. So Moyer identified 8 stages of social movements. Stage 1, normal times. Stage 2, the need for the movement to prove the failure of institutions. Stage 3, ripening conditions. Stage 4, social movement takeoff. Stage 5, identity crisis and powerlessness. Stage 6, majority public support. Stage 7, success. And stage 8, continuing the struggle. Of these 8 stages, I think we're in stage 6, majority public support, at least in the US. So stage 1, normal times, is essentially a basic state of injustice that a given movement seeks to confront. I would say that in the movement to stop the abolition of sex, stage 1, normal times, began with the emergence of the word transgender and lasted through around 2010. During those years, there were hardly any voices speaking out against the concept that some men could be women by calling themselves transgender, though a tiny handful of radical feminists certainly were, beginning with Professor Janice Raymond's 1994 republication of her 1979 book, The Transsexual Empire. For purposes of this analysis, I'm ignoring the problem of the men who pretended to be women before the 1990s, the men we used to call transsexuals. Now I understand that they were a real problem for women and for lesbians in particular. I'm not denying that at all. I'm just saying that it seems to be that in thinking about the contemporary movement to protect women and girls as a sex class, we need to really start in the 1990s with the popular acceptance of the concept of transgender. In stage 2, the movement is required to prove the failure of institutions to the general public. I think I would argue that that started happening around 2010 to 2015. It had become obvious to many more people by then that trans is an injustice against humanity in general and against women and girls in particular. The Women's Liberation Front, or WOLF, was established in 2013, for example, to confront this. In London, I know that radical feminists held conferences called RadFem 2012 and RadFem 2013 to discuss the threats that trans poses to women and girls from a radical feminist perspective. In 2014, which was during this time, the UK feminist Sheila Jeffreys published Gender Hurts. This is how the back cover of that book reads. It's only recently that transgenderism has been accepted as a disorder for which treatment is available. In the 1990s, a political movement of transgender activism coalesced to campaign for transgender rights. Considerable social, political, and legal changes are occurring in response, and there is increasing acceptance by governments and many other organizations and actors of the legitimacy of these rights. This provocative and controversial book explores the consequences of these changes and offers a feminist perspective on the ideology and practice of transgenderism, which the author sees as harmful. It explores the effects of transgenderism on the lesbian and gay community, the partners of people who transgender, children who are identified as transgender, and the people who transgender themselves, and argues that these are negative. In doing so, the book contends that the phenomenon is based upon sex stereotyping, referred to as gender, a conservative ideology that forms the foundation for women's subordination. Gender Hurts argues for the abolition of gender, which would remove the rationale for transgenderism. So that was 2014. And Sheila really hit the nail on the head with that book, although I think she might characterize it slightly differently today. But this was during the time, 2010 to 2015, that I'm arguing that the radical feminist pushback on the power holders was starting to prove the failure of institutions to protect us. Also in 2014, radical feminists, including the Women's Liberation Front, met in Portland, Oregon to organize. Michelle Goldberg published an article about that meeting in the New Yorker called "What is a Woman?" No, Matt Walsh did not invent that question in 2022. Things were heating up, and activists were working hard to prove that our institutions had failed to protect women and girls against the threats of trans. So I'm arguing that from 2010 to 2015, the movement to protect women's sex-based rights was in stage 2 of the map, proving the failure of institutions to protect women and girls as a sex class. Stage 3 of the map is called ripening conditions. I would argue that that happened around 2015 to 2020. According to the map, the takeoff, which is stage 4 of a new social movement, requires preconditions that build up over many years. In other words, stage 3, ripening conditions. These conditions include broad historic developments, a growing discontented population of victims and allies, and a budding autonomous grassroots opposition, all of which encourage discontent with the present conditions, raise expectations that they can change, and provide the means to do it. There's no doubt that this happened globally and in the United States. During this time, 2015 to 2020, US radical feminists often felt like we were shouting into the wind. As mentioned, I joined Wolf in early 2015, and from 2016 to 2020, served on its board of directors. During that time, I and other Wolf board members diligently filed brief after brief in federal court, held events, and tried to grow our numbers. It was also during this time that Megan Murphy spoke out against Bill C-16 in Canada. In early 2017, I went on Tucker Carlson to explain a lawsuit Wolf had filed against the Obama administration. I got a lot of flack for that, but I have no regrets because I think it helped change things and bring public awareness. During this time, things were changing quickly all over the world, most notably on Turf Island. In 2018, things really kicked off in the UK after the Labour Party announced that it wanted to reform the Gender Recognition Act to remove any criteria for legally changing sex. UK feminists and others got louder and louder. Magdalene Burns changed the world before dying tragically in 2019. Yep. In 2018, Kelly J. Keane made the news for putting up a billboard in Liverpool that said a woman is an adult human female, and then being forced to take it down. In 2019, at Wolf's invitation, Keane joined up with Julia Long and Venice Allen to head to the US. We walked the halls of Congress, telling Democratic lawmakers why they needed to knock it off with the gender identity nonsense, which they obviously have not. It was also in 2019 that Women's Declaration International launched in New York. The US chapter was launched in 2020 and formally incorporated in 2021 when I became president. In other words, between 2015 and 2020, everything was heating up. That's why I'm saying that 2015 to 2020 constitutes stage 3 of the map, or ripening conditions, the years leading to stage 4 of the map, which is social movement takeoff. And then came Will Thomas. Again, stage 4 is a social movement takeoff. According to the map, I'm quoting this directly, new social movements surprise and shock everyone when they burst into the public spotlight on the evening TV news and in newspaper headlines. Overnight, a previously unrecognized social problem becomes a social issue that everyone is talking about. It starts with a highly publicized, shocking incident, a triggering event, followed by a nonviolent action campaign that includes large rallies and dramatic civil disobedience. Soon, these are repeated in local communities around the country. Does this sound familiar? I'm still quoting the map for stage 4. The trigger event is a shocking incident that dramatically reveals a critical social problem to the general public in a new and vivid way, such as the arrest of Rosa Parks, the refusing to move to the back of a Montgomery bus in 1955. Trigger events can be deliberate acts by individuals, government, or the opponents, or they can be accidents. By starkly revealing to the public that a social condition and power holder policies blatantly violate widely held, cherished social values, citizen self-interest, and the public trust, the trigger event instills a profound sense of moral outrage in the general populace. Consequently, the general population responds with great passion. demanding an explanation from the power holders, and ready to hear more information from the opposition. The trigger event is also a trumpet's call to action for the new wave opposition groups around the country. I would argue that Will Thomas competing in the 2022 NCAA Women's Swimming Championship was the trigger event that launched the movement to protect the sex-based rights of women and girls and to stop the abolition of sex into takeoff mode around the world, and especially in the US. Thank you, Will.
He's a man! He's a man!
From there, things moved with astonishing speed. Moyer describes Stage 5 as identity crisis of powerlessness and Stage 6 as majority public support. That's where I think things get really interesting. He says that in Stage 5, movement builders lose hope and start to despair. His point is that the power holders seem so strong that success seems impossible and people just burn out. They don't realize they're winning. But then comes Stage 6, majority public support, and success seems inevitable. What's interesting is that he says it's also possible for a movement to leap over Stage 5 and move right into Stage 6, and also that sometimes Stages 5 and 6 can overlap. I kind of think we did a little bit of both. I was writing in December of last year about how I thought at that time that's where we were, the overlap of Stages 5 and 6. I was worried about bickering and conflict within the movement, something I'm sure no one here has ever heard of. But I also wasn't too concerned that those problems would harm the movement overall too much. I think I was right, because I can now say with confidence that we're firmly in Stage 6, majority public support, at least in the US. Turk Island might be further along, and countries like Canada and Australia may be slightly behind. But there's just no doubt about it. Earlier this year, I wrote in an outlet called The Liberal Patriot about how Trump's January executive orders were in near complete alignment with what the clear majority of US voters think about men and women's sports and spaces, and about trans generally. This is true whether one loves or hates Donald Trump, and I'm in the latter category for the record. Polling conducted in the New York Times and Ipsos in January of this year shows that American voters are overwhelmingly in alignment with what Trump's orders accomplish. When asked which of three possible approaches comes closest to their feelings about, quote, the way our society deals with transgender people, roughly half of all voters think that society has gone too far, compared to only a fifth who feel that society has not gone far enough. Even more striking, when asked, and I'm quoting, thinking about transgender female athletes, meaning athletes who were born male at birth but who currently identify as female, do you think they should or should not be allowed to compete in women's sports? 79% of all voters, including 67% of Democrats and 64% of independents, think they should not. This research is also consistent with polling conducted in November 2023 on behalf of WDI USA. That survey reflected a strong consensus in favor of female-only sports and services, female-only spaces and services. For example, 83% of respondents, including 76% of Democrats, agreed that female inmates should share cells only with fellow female prisoners. 85% of respondents, including 74% of Democrats, agreed that a female airline passenger should be patted down only by a female TSA officer. On question after question related to transgender issues, the vast majority of Americans, including large percentages of Democrats and independents, reject the positions the Democratic Party and its politicians have chosen to promote with zeal in recent years. This is also reflected in the statements of a woman I encountered at the Supreme Court in December of 2024, while the court was hearing oral arguments in the case of US versus Scrimetti. Back in 2019, a bunch of us, including this woman, held a rally outside the Supreme Court during oral arguments in a case called Bostock versus Clayton County. At that time, the rally participants were a tiny handful of radical feminists and a slew of conservatives. The rally this past December was very different. In 2024, The woman I'm speaking of also served on the board of Wolf, and our terms overlapped. At some point, she kind of dropped out of the movement to focus on personal and family matters. But she was there at the rally in December, and I approached her to say hello and ask how she was doing. She marveled at the rally participants and said it felt so refreshingly different than it had felt in 2019. I asked what she meant, and she remarked on the viewpoint diversity of the crowd. There were radical feminists and conservatives, of course, which is fine, but there were also gay rights activists and people who held signs that said things like Democrats against puberty blockers. She couldn't believe it. It was now clear that at least in the US, the movement to protect the sex-based rights of women and girls and to stop the abolition of sex has gone mainstream. No longer are we just shouting into the wind. Women on the left have spent years warning Democratic Party leaders of what was coming in November 2024 if they didn't reverse course on this topic. I published my book, The Reckoning, How the Democrats and the Left Betrayed Women and Girls in November 2023, in part for this purpose. Needless to say, the Democrats did not change course. And as predicted, this turn away from common sense on trans cost them votes. We all know about the Kamala Harris is for they them, President Trump is for you ads. I was watching TV when one came on and I nearly fell out of my chair. I knew that was it, and it was. On the first day of July, the University of Pennsylvania entered into an agreement with the US Department of Education to comply with Title IX. This was in the wake of it allowing Thomas to participate in women's swimming. The agreement is breathtaking in its scope. Penn agreed to restore all swimming records and titles to female athletes. It agreed to issue a public statement stating that it will comply with Title IX. It agreed to adopt biology-based definitions for the words male and female. It agreed to apologize to the female athletes who were harmed by the participation of Will Thomas on the team and by his presence in their locker room. This was nothing short of astonishing to those of us who have been paying attention to these matters. And the Penn agreement with the Department of Education does not contain a single reference to the word transgender. Everyone in the room may remember, and I don't know if she's in here, everyone in the room may remember that the mother of a female swimmer who was forced to compete against Thomas during the Ivy League swimming championships in 2022, shortly before the NCAA championships that same year, spoke on WDI's weekly Feminist Question Time. She spoke anonymously then, but she has since gone public. Her name is Kim Jones, and she joined forces with her friend Marcia Smith. Joined forces with her friend Marcia Smith in 2022 to form the group Independent Council on Women's Sports, or ICONS. And now, 3 years later, Penn is completely caved. And what's more, the chief legal correspondent of CBS News, a major US outlet, quoted me in a Twitter post about this development. That's huge. As you all know, the US media tends to completely ignore the TERFs because we don't fit their narrative. But the chief legal correspondent of CBS News quoted me, noting that I'm a former ACLU lawyer. A few days after the announcement about the Penn agreement, the US Supreme Court agreed to take up 2 cases involving women's sports, as we all know by now. In both cases, states have laws on the books protecting women's sports, and male athletes challenge those laws. These cases present a clear opportunity for the US Supreme Court to say what the UK Supreme Court said in April, essentially, that sex is grounded in biology, and that fact sometimes matters in the law. WDI USA filed a friend of the court brief in those cases a few days ago, and I've been monitoring and seeing the whole slew of amicus briefs that are coming in supporting the states, including by the Women's Liberation Front, and including by the International Consortium on Female Sports, I don't know if I got that right, joining with the amazing Dr. Emma Hilton. And I literally learned about a half hour before I got on stage, Reem Al-Salem, the UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls, has filed a friend of the court brief in the United States Supreme Court in support of female-only sports. where she's issued multiple statements against, gender identity, but I'm not aware that she's ever filed an amicus brief in the US Supreme Court. Okay, sorry, we're not out of the woods yet, and there's plenty of work to do. In the US, at least, we've not reached the MAP's stage 7, which is success. I will not be satisfied until we reach that stage, and until the entire establishment left is held to account for what they've done to sacrifice women and girls and material reality at the altar of trans. The MAP doesn't maintain that majority support is synonymous with sex. Majority support is the step before success. According to the MAP, stage 7, or success, begins when the long process of building opposition reaches a new plateau in which the new social consensus turns the tide of power against the power holders and begins an endgame process leading to the movement's success. That's what I want. I want to turn the tide of power against the power holders, such as the Democratic Party and my former employee, the ACLU. The mainstream legacy media simply can't ignore us forever. I understand they are likely to memory hold their complicity in it, and I don't like that. But I'm confident that this will break, and the only question is how. I want to see a reckoning, and I'll keep doing everything in my power to bring it about. For now, I'm content for the movement to have reached majority public support in the US and in most parts of the world. We're so much further from where many of us started back in the earlier stages that I was talking about. And onward we go until we beat the misogynist and authoritarian behemoth of gender identity back under a rock where it belongs. So I will conclude with some bad news and then some good news. The bad news is that we're going to be in stage 6 for a while. Every time I've given some version of this talk, someone has moaned, Kara, when are we going to move beyond stage 6 majority support to stage 7 success? I know, I get it. But the sad truth is that the power holders are going to hold on for dear life. We're seeing that. They are. And, sometimes ending in horrible, horrible tragedies. They're not going to give up. And I'm very sorry to say that the violence is going to continue. They want us to stop, and they will stop at nothing to shut us up. The good news, though, is that we will get there. Again, stage 7 begins when the long process of building opposition reaches a new plateau in which the new social consensus turns the tide of power against the power holders and begins an endgame process leading to the movement's success. Stage 6 is a long process, and we're still in it, but we will get there, thanks to the TERFs in this room and all over the world. Thank you. I obviously did not talk for an hour. We can have discussion if you'd like, or we could go on to Catherine's, the next thing.
Yeah, we've got about half an hour for Q&A, so I would say line up and take care of your questions. Where do we line up? Oh, sorry. So there's a microphone on this side, and then there's a microphone on that side.
I'm Gloria Morris. I'm a retired public defender, and I'm also a former member of the ACLU. I cut up my card when the ACLU won their case in Illinois, allowing a man to go into a women's prison. Had too many women clients going to Illinois prisons, and that was just a bridge too far for me. But I'm concerned that, I am absolutely not in favor of having men in women's prisons and men in women's sports and men in women's rape crisis centers. But I'm also not in favor of jumping in bed with those who would take away our right to abortion, our right to birth control, our right to vote. And so I'm wondering, what are we doing on that other front? Because I don't think we can call ourselves in stage 6 until women count, and not just one branch or the other of the patriarchy.
So, so there's a lot there, obviously. But on the specific question of what WDI is doing on the other fronts, in the early years, WDI spent a lot of time, I'll get into this in the abortion panel with Liz Fedak tomorrow, but WDI did a lot of pro-abortion rights advocacy. It has a state legislative action team that's headed up by Lauren Levy, and we submitted so many pieces of testimony to either support pro-abortion rights bills or to oppose anti-abortion rights bills, because we're on record as saying we support women's right to abortion. And then in, 2024 maybe, or maybe it was earlier, Democrats started doing something incredibly sneaky, which is put forth pro-abortion bills that also enshrine gender identity. So they simultaneously say they'll support, will protect abortion in law, but they also will encourage transing of kids and the obliteration of women's spaces. So that makes radical feminist advocacy on that topic very difficult, and Liz will talk in the abortion panel tomorrow about how she confronted that when New York did it, which it ended up passing, and the advocates of that measure, which enshrined gender identity in the state constitution, they called it an abortion rights bill, and countless women, I'm sure, voted for it, having no idea what they were also voting for. So that's one of the most cynical things I have seen my party do, pretty much ever. So that makes fighting on that front difficult. On the more general topic of working with conservatives, for years now, radical feminists have grappled with how to handle that question. And before WDI existed, I can't speak for Wolf today, but what Wolf ended up deciding was it made sense to form strategic alliances in a cross-partisan fashion to get things done. But that doesn't mean that Wolf has ever, at least to the best of my knowledge, compromised on its commitment to women and girls. If you're aware of any evidence that it has, okay, but I'm certainly not. Certainly when I was on the board, Wolf didn't compromise its principles or its commitment to women and girls at all. And I would be very surprised if it has since.
I'm not a certified speaker here, and I don't have my facts in order. But I would just say that they're taking money from the Heritage Foundation and so on, and working with Alabama Republicans to define women, so that then they can take away women's rights. It's problematic. I'm also a Wolf member, but I don't wear rose-colored glasses as that member.
It was very public knowledge that in 2016, Women's Liberation Front received a $15,000 grant from the Alliance Defending Freedom. I was on the board at that time, and we spoke very openly about it, so that's not a secret. I'm not divulging any secrets by saying that. It was very contentious and difficult, and the board struggled, quite frankly, with whether to do it, and spoke with membership, and took all sorts of opinions and had many discussions, and ended up doing it. And all I can say on the money issue is that when I was on the board, that's the only time Wolf received any money from ADF. If it had since 2020, it may have, I just don't know about it.
Well, thank you. I hesitate to celebrate us being in stage 6 when we're in the situation we're in right now.
So this is specifically with respect to the movement to protect the sex-based rights of women and girls and to stop the abolition of sex. That's what I'm referring to when I say we're in stage 6.
I'm a more broad-based feminist, and I think we have a hell of a long way to go.
Oh, I would totally agree with you about that, no question.
Hello?
Okay, hi.
Okay. Hello, my name's Natalie. My question is actually, what is WDI's specific stance? Obviously we don't agree with gender ideology, but I know a lot of conservatives will still go on to say, there are only 2 genders, and a lot of radical feminists, their goal is to abolish gender as a whole. So I guess 2 questions in one. Does WDI openly state that they want to abolish the concept of gender? And second of all, when we talk about laws and stuff, we can advocate for abortion laws. We can make that legal. We can't exactly make it illegal to force gender and like show all these stereotypes and stuff that women are supposed to be dainty. Because that's a lot of what, there are people with sex dysphoria, but a lot of modern trans people, they have gender dysphoria, which is where they're like, well, I'm masculine, but I have a vagina. That's not allowed, I'm a man. So is there any way that we could, and this would be in the future, this would be past step 7, but is there any way we could, I don't know, try to, make the gender thing, like women are feminine, like less, less socially normal.
Yeah, WDI is unapologetically and emphatically a gender abolitionist organization, for sure, no question. I mean, then when you get into questions like, can we craft laws to protect gender nonconformity, like that becomes very interesting from a legislative drafting perspective, because it's like, they're just very challenging questions about how you do that in the law. But WDI absolutely supports the abolition of gender. And supports nonconformity with sex stereotypes, of course.
Hi, Kara.
Hello, Julie.
I'm not a first-time caller or a first-time listener, but I'm here for you. I am here to say that it's fun to listen to all the steps, and it's fun to recognize us in those steps. We don't think about that when we're doing stuff, but it's there. And we didn't really know what we were doing except for saying no to this bullshit. So thank you for pointing out what we've done and how far we've come and how far we have to go. And thank you for leading us. We've looked to you the whole time. So thank you.
Hi everybody, I'm Forrest. I'm the Massachusetts state contact for WDI. Kara, I met you briefly on Zoom and it was wonderful to hear you. I wanted to ask you something you said briefly towards the end just now. This came to mind because I recently wrote a piece for Colette on Robin Westman and...
I'm sorry, on what?
Sorry, Robin Westman, the trans-identified man who committed the shooting at the Annunciation School. And then there's Tyler Robinson, who murdered Charlie Kirk, whose motive seemed to at least be, he was not trans-identified, but his partner was, and it seems to be related. And then I just read up in my hotel room that the man who tried to assassinate Brett Kavanaugh is now in prison identifying as transgender, and, identifying as female. And you mentioned briefly tragedy, and I was wondering if you were referring, at least like tacitly, to the recent spate of violence that seems to be growing from transgender identified males and females. And I was wondering if you see that as sort of the last spasms of a dying movement. That's basically their objection to the fact that we're winning, and what you think that will look like in the next few years.
So, yes and yes. I do think that. I do think it is indicative of the last spasms of a dying movement. It's a terrifying, indication of a dying movement. Before I forget, I want to let you know that I thought when you started talking about an article you recently published, I thought you meant you were going to refer to the article you published in The Hill about how even on college campuses, even people who say they support gender identity don't really mean it. They just would never voice their opposition out loud among their peers. Your article is quoted in our brief before the Supreme Court. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the rest of your question.
I know you can't predict the future, you don't have a crystal ball, but I'm just wondering if you think, what you think this is going to look like. The violence is going to increase. If we're at risk, I know that we are at risk and we have been, but how long do you think this stage of their, I don't even know what to describe it as yet, I'm still figuring that out, but how long do you think it will last?
I don't know. I hope we've seen the last of it. I guess that's all I can say.
Thank you for answering.
Yep. Oh, I thought she was getting up for a question. Anything else, or should we just is Elizabeth in the room?
Yes.
Go, Kara!
Yes, like 12 Elizabeths in the room.
Yeah. If there are no questions, maybe you want to just move on to the next agenda item?
So we have a 10-minute break scheduled for the next session. So it's 7:38 now, so take until 7:50 and then we'll reconvene a little bit earlier. Thank you so much, Kara. See you all at 7:50.
Just repeating this into the mic in case no one heard me.